Blumenfeld. She's a former senior policy advisor for the Middle East peace process in the U.S. State Department. Currently a Middle East analyst at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, and she's in Washington. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Linda.
So a lot to unpack here. I want to start with what happened yesterday. The International Court of Justice calling on Israel to end its military operation in Rafah. Israel has vowed, they say, quote, no power on earth will stop it from protecting its citizens and going after Hamas in Gaza. I'm wondering what you think this ruling changes when it comes to Israel's war efforts.
Absolutely. Well, look, the court can't enforce the ruling, but the United States can. So the only court that matters is the court of opinion at the White House. And clearly, from an operational point of view, and if you look at it as surgery, this is going to be more of an arthroscopic attack on Rafah rather than a bone saw, which is helpful. The United States can moderate Israel's behavior, and we do still have some leverage because nothing speaks louder than weapons, and they're heavily dependent on America for weapons.
As we mentioned, this isn't the only thing that's happened this week. Going back to earlier in the week, the top prosecutor at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, said they would seek arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his defense minister. How significant was that from your perspective?
I think it's fascinating. Look, from the outside looking in, it's flat out bad, right? These are unprecedented rulings. But from Netanyahu's point of view, from the inside looking out, it's a little more nuanced for several reasons. First of all, he was undergoing attacks from inside his own war cabinet, domestically, politically. These rulings rallied even his opposition around him, sort of rallying around the Israeli flag. The second thing is it validates Netanyahu's point of view, which is the world hates Israel no matter what it does. So we need to proceed in order to survive. I would rather be alive and hated than loved and dead is kind of his philosophy. And third, some of these rulings, for example, the ICC arrest warrants, they put him on par with Putin. And we sit here in Washington and say that's awful. But for Netanyahu, being a kind of bad guy, sitting where he is not necessarily a bad thing. As he said recently, sort of hinting toward the potential treaty with Saudi Arabia, countries don't make treaties with the weak. This is all about, since October 7th, proving that Israel can be strong again and re-achieve the deterrence that it lost in that dramatic attack on October 7th.
But we also had signals from other countries like Spain, Ireland, and Norway who said this week that they would recognize Palestinian statehood. Some have viewed that as a signal of maybe waning global support for Israel. How much of a blow do you think diplomatically this was for Israel?
Well, one thing I definitely learned in the State Department, where we unsuccessfully tried to negotiate peace between Israelis and Palestinians, is timing is the fairy dust of diplomacy. The timing of this announcement didn't really have much effect on the ground in Rafah. And it just depends on what happens next. If the United States can pull out this ceasefire and then roll that into what our original goal was, which was greater regional integration, a more prosperous Middle East, that's what we were very close to clinching before October 7th when Hamas came and spoiled it, then it won't have a long-term impact. It was diplomatically bold what these countries did, but in a sense, given the timing, it was emotionally tone-deaf and unproductive because it just increased paranoia on the Israeli side. And from the Palestinian side, it raised expectations without laying out a clear path forward to actually realizing that statehood.
And we were talking earlier in the show about those efforts towards a ceasefire, sort of renewed efforts. We've been here before. We've seen this before where there was a lot of hope that a ceasefire might be able to be reached. What are your thoughts now as we hear word that they've been sort of reignited?
Well, I heard two hopeful words yesterday in the readout from the phone call between President Biden and Egyptian President Sisi. They call them new initiatives. And that does give me hope because obviously the old way wasn't working. Look, it's Memorial Day weekend in the United States. We're coming around the bend here toward the presidential election in November. And there's a lot of skin in the game, as we say here, for Biden to make the ceasefire work. So today I'm optimistic. It obviously depends on the parties, though. There is a kind of ceasefire here in Washington, but we can't want it more than they do.
Lots to watch in the days ahead. Thanks for being with us today, Laura Blumenfeld.
Thank you.